Yes.
Welcome back to our boat. It's the first time we've been able to come for a few weeks, and Dave is now semi-resident. He's going to be here for the next few months.
Yes, I'm on a sabbatical from work. The Methodist Church very kindly gives me one of those every 7 years, so hoping to make huge progress over the next few weeks. As we think about that progress, and been celebrating Easter and resurrection. So refitting a boat is about new life and bringing resurrection to what was broken.
And we'd like to make some connections as well with our sustainable agenda, because when you take an old boat, the boat has been built and there is a lot of embedded carbon in that process of building and manufacturing and making fiberglass. And the fiberglass hull can't be recycled, at least with current technology. So if you're reusing parts of your boat, you are on a win with your carbon footprint. It's almost as if you start with a negative carbon footprint, and then, as you know, the mantra for ecological sustainability is reuse, repair, recycle, and you're doing all of those things when you're making use of an old boat.
Where your recycling isn't possible, you're actually focused on the reuse and repair rather than the disposal, which is
not pedantic at all.
I'm not at all pedantic. And it turns out that some of this we knew before, some we've learnt over the last few years of working on this boat, watching other people's channels, that there are some things that make this rival particularly suited to bringing new life, to resurrection.
Fortunately for us. So we're going to bring you our 5 ways that we think this style of boat, the way it's built, helps us to bring it back to life. And then at the end, 3 tips to make your life easier while you're refitting your boat.
And spot the tips that we didn't know ahead of time, and the tips that we have followed from the beginning. So let's get stuck into these points. And the number 1 is coming now.
Our deck and hull joint is entirely fiberglass. There are no deck beams or wooden construction techniques used in this part of our boat. So we've watched, say, Magic Carpet 2, and they've done some fantastic work. But the reason they needed to is because there were beams here which had suffered from water ingress, and our deck shelf is fiberglass on which our fiberglass deck sits, and so therefore we've not had to deal with any of those kind of problems.
And our number 2 is also about decks, is whether you've got a core or not. So we've had so many leaks. Every single one of these fittings, the track just behind me, the windows, eye bolt here for a harness, dorade vents, hatch, mast foot, everything has leaked when we got the boat. But it hasn't mattered in the way that we see on Sail Life, and we saw on Sailing Solaris and so on, because all of this is solid. There's no core to the deck, so it doesn't feel quite perhaps as rigid when you tap it, because it's not thick sandwich construction. However, when water goes through here, it's just going through the GRP, not damaging a core. And so we can take off all these things that have been leaking, we can fix it and stop the leaks, but not have to take the whole core apart and re-strengthen it. Also means that fitting things to your deck is much easier, because you haven't got to take the core out and fill it with thickened epoxy. So we love the fact that our deck isn't cored, and the places where we've had holes that have leaked on the cabin roof, which is the only cored bit, we have been fortunate, and the core hasn't got damaged over a large area, so hasn't been quite as bad as it could have been. This is a huge time saver though, so really, compared to the work that Mads had to do on Sail Life of taking his whole deck off and rebuilding it, this is a huge time saver. What number is it? About 3?
4, I don't know.
No, it's 3. Okay, so our third big thing that saves a huge amount of time in a refit is whether you've got to do any work on your keel. So our keel here is an encapsulated keel. All the ballast is inside fiberglass from about here down, and it's enormous. You look at the thickness here of the keel and the way that it's glassed into the hull. And if we compare that to so many of the sailing channels where we've seen people with bolt-on keels who've had to service, unbolt, reattach, they've had iron keels that have needed huge amounts of work on them. So think about Expedition Evans, for example. Or even when it's encapsulated, if it's not done as solidly as this, you look at Uma when they first moved their boat, the keel was just flopping around because it wasn't relying on just the structure of the fiberglass, but on floor timbers that had been damaged, and that took away the rigidity. You look at Mads on Sail Life, and he had to redo and glass around all the timbers that were holding the hull where the keel attached. Ours doesn't rely on any of that. So no work that we've got to do at all in terms of the keel being attached to the boat and being rigid. So huge time saver.
So number 4 advantage of our boat is that there are no internal glass fibre mouldings, and you can see how we've been refitting our galley, as you will have seen if you've been watching our videos, out of plywood. But the original galley furniture was plywood, and that makes it so much easier to just take it out and change around what you don't want. For instance, our chart table and all the things there, well, built out of very solid plywood, and we won't feel it's a difficult thing to take that out if we decide to change it. And then once you've taken out that plywood furniture, you've just got the hull, which you can just see here. We've taken out all the cupboards and it's a bare hull. It's easy to see what's there. If anything's leaking, you can see that, and you can just start again with whatever you want to put in. It saves a lot of difficult and dangerous to your health efforts to grind away fiberglass. We haven't had to do very much of that, although obviously bulkheads are tabbed in. The furniture is not, it's just plywood. Point number 5 is that we have an aft cabin, and we wanted an aft cabin, and we looked for a boat with one because we thought while we were living on the boat it would be really nice to have separated spaces. But what we didn't realise is that while you're refitting your boat, it has a really big advantage, because if you want to work in this main cabin, you can move things to the aft cabin and you can still sleep in it, and it will remain relatively clean while you're doing work in the other cabins. And similarly, if you need to do work in the aft cabin, you can come and sleep and keep everything clean in the main cabin while you're working in the aft cabin. And this has saved us a lot of money in accommodation, because we can just live on our boat while we're refitting it.
Our first top tip for making a boat refit easier is to get rid of your sea toilets and fit composting toilets. Or at least you don't have to fit them. It is just sitting here and we can move it around. So we have 2 of these, and it means that if we're working in the fore cabin and the main cabin, we've got our aft heads next to where we sleep available to use as a toilet, and we can use these in the boatyard. No having to go out in the middle of a storm to go to the clubhouse to go to the loo. So having a composting toilet saves a huge amount of time. When you're refitting, stripping out your heads compartment, you're still going to have a working toilet. You can just put it on the floor anywhere to be able to use it. And when you're in your boatyard, no problem at all. You don't have to be connected to any sewage system. You haven't got a tank of sewage that you can't pump out or anything like that. So composting toilets are brilliant for saving time and making life more comfortable when you're doing a major refit.
So our second top tip for when you're refitting your boat is born of hard experience. When you come onto your boat, the head lining might look a little tired, it sags in places, you think, oh, it's not so bad, and it looks quite nice, and you don't fancy all that work, which is daunting. But our recommendation is just get rid of it. Get rid of all your headlining. You will be thankful in the end, because the more we've got rid of, the better pleased we've been with the effort that we've made. Because underneath your headlining are lurking things that you can't see, which are such as this derayed vent, which was leaking all the way across here, as we mentioned before, and you can't see that. The headlining hides it. It's to some extent waterproof, and the water runs behind it. Unless you get rid of your headline, you can't see what's going on. You can't see the little leaks around your windows or anything like that. And when you first take your headlining down, it looks horrible. Maybe others are not as bad as ours. Ours was brown, there are bits of fiberglass hanging down. It's horrible. It really is, and it looks a little bit mildewy. But our top tip for that, an extra one, is put the paint on. We use bilge paint because it sticks to everything. It seals up all the bits of fiberglass. It makes it look clean. It just makes you feel better about it while you're finding all those leaks and the things that you need to deal with.
Our third tip is to do with your windows. All our windows were leaking when we bought the boat, and we didn't actually realise quite how bad it was to start with. But we took one of the windows apart and realised that it was going to be almost impossible to refurbish it. There were stainless steel screws in the frame that had corroded into place. It was bending when we took it out, so it had been a huge job, and you can see somebody who did that huge job on the Wildings channel on their old catamaran. We had to do it here. We refurbished our hatches, and it took about 4 or 5 days for 2 of these hatches to properly clean them all off to be able to fit new perspex. So for the windows, we decided not to try to refurbish the old aluminium frames. We were frightened that we would get to the 14th one and then it would break, and we'd have wasted all the time and all the others because they wouldn't match. So we've gone for very simple bolt-on acrylic, much thicker, it's oversized, it's bedded onto butyl, really simple to fit, and it's waterproof. Saved us a huge amount of time over trying to refurbish all the individual windows. We did it in a week, first half term. So whilst it's expensive buying them all, we would have had to buy loads of bits to do that refurbishment, and we don't think it would have looked as good or been as waterproof anyway. So replacing all the windows in one go saved us a huge amount of time.
I'm just heading home and leaving Dave here on his own. So please leave some comments to encourage him below. Like and subscribe. See you soon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up.